The silence is shattered by a metallic scream. Not an alarm. Worse. The sound of tearing steel, a grind turning into a screech. Then, a deep, crushing impact against the deck. We are inside the Ajax, but not in its rusty belly, in its white, sterile heart. Fluorescent lights flicker madly, casting jagged shadows on faces twisted not by terror, but by cold, professional despair. The young operator, Alexei Petrov, is pinned to his console. Before him, screens dance with crazed green lines dissolving into static. Through headphones clamped to his ears until the cartilage aches, only the deafening roar of interference. He tears them off, and in the second of silence, he hears another sound. From outside, from the ocean. A loud, distinct splash. He stumbles to a porthole gun port, sees a fragment, a piece of complex latticework, something that never belonged to a cargo ship, sinking into the black water of the Pacific, leaving a foaming trail. The last bubbles rise to the surface, reflecting distant lights. The lights of the American island of Guam. A voice sounds behind him, toneless, emotionless, the voice of Major Victor. What fell? Alexei turns. Victor stands amidst the chaos, immobile as a rock. His dark jacket is unrumpled. In his hand, a notepad. The Corsian antenna array, the outer contour, direct line of sight. It's on the bottom now, 500 meters from the hull. Victor's eyes slowly sweep the room, registering each person. The technician, whose fingers tremble over emergency stop record buttons. The decryption girl biting her fist to keep from screaming. His gaze is a deep freeze. Who saw it fall from outside? Silence. From the Ajax, no one, Alexei says. But if from the island or a passing ship at that moment, there was a binocular, a telescope. Victor doesn't let him finish. He is already turning to the internal commutator, pressing a button. His voice now sounds in the captain's cabin, on the bridge, in every corner of this double vessel. General malfunction. Immediately. All to legend. Second stage readiness. He releases the button, looks at Alexei. You just buried 3 years of work, Petrov. I hope your recordings up to this point were flawless. What now? Alexei whispers, watching the bubbles vanish in the porthole. Now, Victor makes the first entry in his notebook. We begin, from the very start. 48 hours earlier, the ocean, endless, indifferent. The Ajax crawls across it like a tired, sick insect. Its hull, a theatrical mask of rust and flaking paint. From its funnel, a wispy, deliberately misfiring smoke. On the bridge, Captain Boris Ignatiev, a man with a face like a map of unfamiliar seas, raises his binoculars. He is not looking at the horizon. He is looking down, at the water near the hull. Close up on his eye in the eyepiece, he sees the reflection of his ship, distorted, dark, dissolving in oily swirls, a reflection of the truth. His hand, covered in old burns and a compass tattoo, rests on the helm. He turns it half a degree, not for course, to change the character of the hull's vibration. He is conducting a symphony of decay. Below, in the dirty part of the ship, a sailor in a greasy overall, Ivan, repairs a winch. His movements are broad, noticeable. He bangs a hammer, grunts. Above him, on the railing, sits an American sailor from a neighboring freighter, who took a photo of the quirky Russian rust bucket. Ivan gives him a foolish grin, waves. The moment the American turns away, the smile is wiped from Ivan's face as if erased. His hand drops under a tarpaulin, touches not a wrench, but a small, cold box with a button, a seismic sensor. It records the frequency of the screws of a passing American frigate. His eyes, dull a moment ago, are now sharp and focused. Dirt on the face, steel inside. Ignatiev descends. He walks along a narrow deck reeking of onion and machine oil. Enters his cabin. Closes the door. For a second, his shoulders slump. He opens a safe disguised as an old refrigerator. Inside, not money or documents, a violin in a case and a thick folder stamped Top Secret. He takes out the folder. On the first page, a diagram of the Korshun antenna complex, and in red pencil, already entered days ago, a notation on one of the nodes. Metal fatigue, risk of rupture, under load, 7. The captain pinches the bridge of his nose. He knew and could not stop the mission. Now this notation is a death sentence, waiting for its hour. He exits and moves to the invisible boundary, to a pile of rotting crates in the very bow. Moves them aside. A steel door. A wheel. And behind it, the hum. Low. Powerful. Alive. Vibrating the air in the lungs. The capsule room. Light that cuts the eyes. Alexei Petrov at his console. On his screens. Not green lines, but a waterfall of digits, frequencies, spectrograms. In his headphones, voices. Clear, everyday voices from the ether. Hawk 2. Confirm loading of special munitions for target sand dune. Confirm. Orange clusters on board. Launch in 20. Alexei doesn't just hear. He sees. He sees a map in his head. Coordinates. He knows Sand Dune is a village on a riverbank in Vietnam. Orange clusters are not oranges. They are napalm. His fingers automatically type the code, translating the message into Russian. But his other hand is clenched into a fist so tight, the knuckles are white. He blinks, and for a second he thinks he sees a reflection on the sterile white panel, not of his face, but of tongues of flame. He shakes his head sharply. The reflection disappears. He doesn't notice Victor approaching. He is silently watching Alexei's screen, his clenched fist, the blinking translation line. Special munitions, clusters, Petrov. Alexei flinches as if electrocuted. You are not at the Nuremberg trials. You are a microphone. Microphones do not judge. They record. Clench your fist tighter, and you will break a finger. Break a finger. You will make an error in the code. An error in the code, and we all become the accused. Do you understand this arithmetic, Petrov? The arithmetic of war? Alexei nods, unable to utter a word. He unclenches his fist. On his palm, 4 red crescent moons from his nails. Victor moves to the central console, connects to the bridge. Captain, it's time. The weather is deteriorating. Perfect conditions for a breakdown. Ignatiev's voice over the speaker, dry. Confirm. Beginning the performance. All to stations. On the bridge, Ignatiev gives a quiet order. Mechanically, his hand reaches for a hidden toggle under the control panel. He doesn't press it. He looks at his fingers. They are absolutely dry, steady. He takes a deep breath, sinking into the role, and switches on the emergency siren. Over the Ajax, a hoarse, plaintive wail erupts, the cry of a metal bird shot in flight. At this moment, somewhere on the shore of Guam, in an air-conditioned room with maps on the walls, a young U.S. military intelligence officer, Eric Shaw, looks up from a report. He walks to a window overlooking the harbor. Through binoculars, he sees an old cargo ship emitting a distress signal. He sees commotion on deck. He sees smoke. That Ajax again, he mutters to himself. Last time their water desalinator broke right in the area of our training range. He lowers the binoculars. His face shows nothing but mild curiosity, but his fingers drum on the windowsill, rhythmically, methodically, as if he is already starting a countdown. On the Ajax, Emergency lights cast crimson reflections on the water. The ship begins a slow, controlled drift. It is no longer sailing. It is broken. It is now a trap, bait, an invisible listening device held to the door of someone else's war. In his headphones, Alexei hears a new voice. From the shore. American. Businesslike. To the rusty ghost. At Point Alpha. We offer assistance. Require a tow? Ignatiev answers over the radio, his voice coarse, full of feigned despair and accented English. Niet, tow. We have parts. How to say, fix ourselves. Maybe week. Maybe 2. Thank you. Alexei closes his eyes. Under his fingers, console keys. In his ears, voices planning the destruction of a village codenamed Sand Dune. Inside, a quiet, growing wail, like the one from the siren above his head. The wail of a conscience driven into a cage of duty and steel. He opens his eyes. On the screen before him, the latest test data for the Caution antenna. The load indicator blinks yellow. A warning. He logs it. Just a line of code among thousands. Outside, in the darkness of the approaching storm, invisible in the night, the massive, complex contour of the Caution antenna begins to turn toward the shore of Guam. It creaks in the wind. Tired steel sings its swan song, a song no one but the ship itself can yet hear. The silence after the breakdown turned out to be the loudest. The Ajax hung motionless, rocking on a heavy ocean swell. The storm, fueled both by meteorology and artificially amplified by their accident, battered the hull. Each wave, a hammer blow on the anvil of rusty metal. Inside in the white compartment, this hum transformed into a constant, exhausting pressure on the eardrums. The air grew thick with the smell of ozone, sweat, and hidden panic. On the second day of the drift, Alexei Petrov found his voice. In the waterfall of intercepts, among dozens of call signs, one repeated most often, Falcon 7. The pilot's voice was calm, almost melancholic, with a slight southern accent. He didn't shout, didn't curse. He clearly reported coordinates, confirmed orders. But once, between a target designation and an acknowledgement, Alexei caught a micropause. And in that pause, a barely audible suppressed sigh. A human sigh of fatigue. In that moment, Falcon 7 ceased to be just a signal. He became a person. Alexei had a secret prisoner in his mind. On the captain's bridge, the legend worked flawlessly. Ignatiev, dressed in dirty work clothes, personally repaired a non-existent breakdown in full view of passing American boats, acting out a furious, silent pantomime with wrenches and curses. His hands were covered in oil, his eyes squinted in pretended rage. But every 15 minutes he glanced furtively at a hidden monitor embedded in the helm. On it, the coverage diagram of the faltering Caution antenna. The red risk zone slowly crept toward the critical mark. Down below, in the mess of the dirty crew, Sailor Ivan sweated over potatoes. He was one of the fleet's best radio operators, and now he was chopping onions. Next to him sat Victor, slowly drinking cold tea. His presence froze the space. "They're nervous," Ivan said quietly, not looking at Victor, thinly slicing potatoes. "You can hear it. On the ether. Their shore base. They're discussing us not as an accident, as an anomaly." Victor set his mug down. The sound was precise and hard. Specifically, words like too convenient, timing, check Lloyd's register. Officer Shaw. He requested a detailed report, not on the breakdown, on our appearance within a 500-mile radius of Guam over the past year. Victor didn't answer. He stood up and left. His next move was predictable and terrible. He ordered a tightened regime. Now every exit from the inner compartment to the outer world was accompanied by a 5-minute contrast immersion procedure. A person sat in a tiny airlock chamber under camera surveillance, mechanically applying dirt, machine oil to their face and hands, changing a spotless white shirt for a ragged overall. It was a ritual of erasing personality. Alexei, going through it, caught himself forgetting which face was his real one. Meanwhile, Eric Shaw on Guam wasn't sleeping. His room had turned into the nerve center of a single obsession. On the wall, an enlarged satellite photo of the Ajax. Red threads connected dots. Its routes over the past 2 years, always near but never inside active NATO exercise zones. All its breakdowns coincided with major military or diplomatic events. Coincidence? Shaw didn't believe in coincidences. He called for a Coast Guard helicopter for search and rescue exercises. The exercise route passed 0.5 kilometer from the Ajax. When the roar of rotors reached the deck of the Ghost, Ignatieff was on the bridge. He didn't look up. He kept hammering at a hopelessly ruined part, his back expressing only irritation at the noise. But inside, everything tightened. He knew this was not an exercise. This was a tactile probe. The helicopter made 2 circles. From its side door protruded the lens of a long-range camera. Inside in the compartment, Victor gave the order for silence. All work with equipment, all conversation ceased. People froze in unnatural poses, afraid to create any vibration. Alexei sat staring at a screen now showing a static diagnostic diagram. He heard his own heart beating in time with Ignatieff's hammer blows on the deck. It was a duet on the edge of exposure. In his headphones, disconnected from the external antenna field, he heard only that pounding and the distant roar of rotors. And in this hybrid noise, he imagined a voice. Falcon 7. He blinked. The voice vanished. It was the hallucinatory sound of exhaustion. After the helicopter left, the tension didn't ease, it crystallized. Victor gathered key personnel. They're getting closer. The next step will be a boat with assistance or an inspection. The legend must be perfect. Every gesture, every look. Petrov. Alexei flinched. You are the worst at the transformation. You forget to slouch. Your eyes are too clean. You have the eyes of a listener. They need to be clouded. Tomorrow you go on deck. For a full shift. You will paint rusty pipes in the sun until you forget what a screen looks like. It was a punishment or salvation. The next day, Alexei, in paint-soaked clothes under the blazing sun, brushed hot metal. The sun burned his skin, the red lead paint seeped into his pores. Nearby, pretending to sleep, lay Ivan. See that boat over there? Ivan whispered through his teeth, eyes closed. Coast Guard. Been sitting there for 3 hours. Doing nothing. Just watching. They're recording our faces, gaits, habits, creating a dossier on each sailor. Don't look at them directly. Spit overboard. Scratch your armpit. Be crude. Be simple. Alexei spat. He scratched. He tried. But his thoughts were in the ether. He caught himself repeating in his mind, in time with the brushstrokes, the rhythm of Morse code accidentally intercepted the day before. He was deciphering it. It was a weather forecast for a carrier group. He was here, but his mind was there, in the White Room, listening to the sigh of Falcon 7. That evening, when Alexei returned, sunburned and hollow, to his console, he received a signal. Not through antennas, through a person. The decryption girl, Lydia, whose fingers usually fluttered over the keyboard, sat motionless. She was staring at a printout. Her face was as white as the paper. "Alexei," her voice was a hoarse whisper. "Look." It was an intercept from a closed U.S. Air Force channel. A command meeting, a fragment. Just a few lines, but they contained a code name, coordinates, and a timestamp. Operation Deep Echelon. A strike on a rear area hospital and transport hub. Time, in 72 hours. Location, where, according to confirmed intelligence, there were no military facilities. Only medics and refugees. Alexei felt the floor drop away. He looked at Lydia. In her eyes were not tears, but ice. The ice of understanding. "We must," she began. "We must do nothing," came Victor's voice. He stood in the doorway. He had seen everything. His face was a mask. "This is information. Only information. It will be processed at the center. Perhaps passed through diplomatic channels. Anonymously, to avoid casualties. But not by us. Our task is to record." "They will die," burst from Alexei, his whisper broken and loud. "Possibly," Victor agreed coldly. "Or possibly, the warning will work. That is not your decision. Your decision is to preserve this post. For all future intercepts. For the chance to know sooner next time. If you compromise us now to save 100 people, you kill the chance to save thousands later. Do you understand this arithmetic, Petrov? The arithmetic of war." Victor walked over, took the printout from Lydia's trembling hands, neatly placed it in a folder. "The incident is closed. Resume work. And Petrov," he turned at the exit. "You're Falcon 7. He's on the pilot list for Operation Deep Echelon. He will be one of those to pull the trigger. Tomorrow, on the air, listen more closely. Maybe there will be that sigh in his voice again." He left. Alexei sank into his chair. He put the headphones back on. The ether filled with voices, codes, ciphers. He searched for one voice, a southern accent. Falcon 7. And when he found it, the voice was giving an order for an armament check. It was clear. Professional. No sigh. Alexei closed his eyes. Behind his eyelids danced spots from the sun and paint. He saw faces he had never seen. The face of pilot Falcon 7, the faces of the medics in that hospital. They mixed, blurred into a single mass of victims and executioners, erased by war. He turned on the recording. His fingers, still smelling of lead paint, rested on the keys. He was a microphone. He had to record. But inside, in the silence of his skull, where the hum of machinery was gone, stood a single, deafening question, for which there was no code for an answer. A question quieter than a whisper, and louder than any explosion. The silence after Victor's words was poisonous. It hung in the sterile air of the compartment, heavy as mercury. Alexei Petrov no longer just listened to the ether. He hunted. His mind, honed by months of training, now narrowed to one frequency, one voice. Falcon 7. With each intercept, he built a profile in his mind. Disciplined, taciturn, with a characteristic micro-pause before confirming an order. A soldier's profile. But in those pauses, Alexei now sought not humanity, but a crack. A seed of doubt he could mentally nurture to justify his hatred or his pity. He found nothing. Only cold efficiency. On the bridge, Captain Ignatieff waged his war. A war with the ocean and the American Coast Guard. A Coast Guard cutter now sat on the visible horizon, turning into a constant, nagging dot. Ignatieff communicated with them over the radio, his voice coarse, grateful, and dim-witted. He complained about lack of parts, about an evil Russian mechanic who ruined everything, about the heat. He performed a farce, while his eyes, scanning the radar, tracked the cutter's every move, every antenna flash on its mast. They weren't just watching, they were listening, scanning the ether around the Ajax for hidden transmitters. Ignatieff knew this. He ordered the use of only ultra-low frequency, pulsed channels for communication with the center. Transmissions lasted milliseconds, could be mistaken for atmospheric noise. Each such transmission was an act of supreme risk. The risk materialized on the third day. During one such session, the decryption girl Lydia froze. On her screen, over the lines of encrypted code, floated a faint, barely detectable phantom signal. Someone was trying to intrude on their frequency, not to jam, but to eavesdrop. It was the finest needle inserted into their nervous system. Interference? Alexei asked quietly, noticing her tension. No, Lydia whispered, her fingers frozen over the keys. It's a probe. They're testing for a reaction. If we change parameters or boost protection, they'll know we're not just here. They let the phantom float in their ether for 3 more minutes, imitating natural noise, before it vanished. But the fact was established. The barrier between the Ajax and Guam had become a semi-permeable membrane. That same evening, Viktor summoned Ignatieff to a derelict hold serving as a quiet hell. There, among the shadows of rusty beams, he showed the captain a photograph. A grainy, enlarged shot from the Coast Guard cutter. It showed Eric Shaw, in civilian clothes, with binoculars, standing on a pier looking straight into the lens, straight at them. He's their chief obsessive ideologue, Victor said. He requested access to Lloyd's archives, to our port logs for the last 5 years. He's building a puzzle, and he's already seeing the outline of the picture. We need to do something, to distract, to discredit his theory. Suggestion? Ignatieff asked, his voice tired. Sabotage, but not ours. Theirs. Victor's eyes glinted in the semi-darkness. They have sewage problems at the airbase. A collector pipe explosion. Small but smelly and very humiliating. They'll be busy with internal problems. Shaw will lose resources. Madness, Ignatieff whispered. Any asset we have ashore will be burned. Already burned, Victor countered coldly. He makes contact only in extreme cases. This is an extreme case. The order from the center is approved. Ignatieff understood. It was a move of desperation. The game was escalating. He nodded, tasting bitterness on his tongue. He was the captain of a ship, losing its invisibility. Meanwhile, Alexei reached a boiling point. Operation Deep Echelon was scheduled for dawn. In his headphones, the final briefing was underway. The voice of Falcon 7 droned on, reading coordinates. Those very coordinates. Alexei looked at the clock. The center was silent. No sign the warning had been sent or received. Victor's arithmetic had failed, and then something short-circuited in Alexei. Not a heroic impulse, but a quiet, rational system failure. He saw a way, a huge risk, near certain death, but a way. In the U.S. Air Force communication protocols was a hole, an open, unencrypted channel for emergency weather reports used by civilian vessels. To transmit an anonymous warning in a language they'd understand. Impossible. But to create interference, to create a technical glitch that would delay the launch by an hour, 2. That might be enough. He waited until Victor went to the bridge for a meeting. Waited until Lydia was distracted by complex decryption. His fingers, cold and dry, crept across the control panel not to his working console, but to the backup transmitter, designed for targeted jamming in case of detection danger. He entered the frequency of the Weather Channel, calculated the power. Enough to create broadband white noise for 10 minutes, swamping the ether in the sector of the base. It was like firing a flare right over their heads. He pressed the button. Nothing happened. No hum, no flash. Only a small red light on the panel began blinking with a pulse frequency. The transmitter was active, somewhere 10 miles away, on shore, in the headphones of dispatchers and pilots preparing for launch. A sharp, piercing squeal should have erupted. Alexei leaned back in his chair. He waited for a reaction. Waited for helicopters to drop onto the deck, for assault teams to break down the compartment door. Instead, his own console came to life. On the screen, over all data, a priority signal flashed. A message from the American base, urgent, broadcast. All units, Operation Deep Echelon is delayed. Repeat, delayed. Technical issues with the comm system. New launch time in 4 hours. He had done it. The first wave that hit him was not joy, but a chilling animal terror. He had just given himself away. His interference would be pinpointed. They would narrow the circle. The Ajax would be in the crosshairs. He jumped up to erase logs, disable the transmitter, but it was too late. Victor stood in the doorway. He wasn't looking at Alexei. He was looking at the power meter embedded in the wall. It showed the spike of transmitter activity. Then he slowly shifted his gaze to Alexei's screen, to the message about the operation's delay. Time froze. Only the second hands on the panels ticked, and the clock in Alexei's head, counting down the last moments of his freedom, perhaps his life. Victor said nothing. He slowly walked to the backup panel, checked the data, then turned to Alexei. There was no anger on his face. There was something worse. Cold, clinical understanding. Like a surgeon seeing an inoperable tumor. 4 hours, Victor said quietly. In that time, they won't just fix comms. They will find the source of the interference. They have direction finders on the Cape, on ships. They'll triangulate. And when they realize the noise came from a broken cargo ship. He paused, letting Alexei grasp the depth of the abyss. We have less than 4 hours, Petrov, before your humanitarian gesture becomes a death sentence for all 47 people on this ship. Somewhere outside, in the night, the wind howled, a harbinger of a real storm. 4 hours. It was not time. It was a chemical reaction in a confined space. First, shock, crystal clear and sharp. Then, adrenaline, injecting icy clarity into the veins. And finally, the heavy, relentless sediment of fear, settling to the bottom of every action. Victor did not arrest Alexei. There was no time for a tribunal. Instead, he turned him into the central node in a network of salvation that might already be impossible. You want to save them? Victor asked, his voice like a scraper on metal. Now save them. Every neuron, every synaptic connection you have, now belongs to the ship. You know their protocols, their frequencies, their weak spots better than any of us. Find a loophole. Find noise we can hide in. Alexei, his face drained of blood, nodded. His crime had become his duty. He plunged into the ether with manic intensity. He sought any sign the Americans were already direction-finding, and he found it. After 20 minutes, the Coast Guard cutter began to move. Not toward them. Along an arc, at a distance. The classic first step of triangulation, determining direction. On the bridge, Captain Ignatieff received a terse report from Victor. His face did not flinch. He only clenched the helm once, his knuckles whitening. Petrov's betrayal was a personal hurt, but now it was a tactical variable, like the wind, like the current. "The legend is dead," Victor said. "They will come with an inspection, or a boarding party." "Then we give them what they want," Ignatiev replied. "But not all of it. Initiate Procedure Phoenix. We have 2 hours until they approach." Procedure Phoenix was the plan for destruction, not of the ship, of its soul. The inner compartments were to be sterilized. Equipment dismantled, key nodes blown with impulse charges leaving no flame, only electromagnetic void. Magnetic tapes overwritten with white noise, then melted with acid. It was a surgical amputation of the Ajax's memory. The team worked with silent, polished fury. People who had whispered into headphones for months now broke their tools with bare hands, dousing circuit boards with caustic fluids. Lydia, with deathly calm, fed bundles of decrypted messages into an incinerator, watching as letters and numbers twisted in the flame, turning to ash. Her eyes were dry. It was a funeral rite. Alexei, chained to his console, felt each explosive pack, each act of destruction as physical pain. He was destroying the fruits of his own labor, and in that was a terrible meaning. "I found something." His voice sounded hoarse in the general silence, broken only by sounds of methodical ruin. "They haven't called for reinforcements. No ships, no aircraft, just this cutter. And Shaw is on it. He wants the glory. He wants to take us quietly, personally, to prove his theory." Victor approached, a cold glint in his eyes. "Sure. Intercepts from the base. They're discussing document checks and possible contraband cargo. Not a word about espionage. Shaw is acting within Coast Guard authority. He hasn't convinced his command yet. He only has this cutter and maybe a dozen Marines." This changed everything. It was a thread. Ignatiev made a decision. "We continue Phoenix, but the external legend isn't just buried. We reboot it. We give them contraband." The plan was genius in its simplicity and risk. From hidden caches, they retrieved several crates of actual Soviet weapons, a few old Kalashnikovs, and ammunition. Not for use, but as evidence. They smeared them with oil sludge and hid them in a coal bunker, with accidental traces leading to it. It was poison meant to distract from the real disease. If accused of arms smuggling, a diplomatic scandal, detention, exchange. If caught with signals intelligence equipment, an act of war. They chose the lesser evil, hoping Shaw, finding the weapons, would be satisfied and dig no deeper. Meanwhile, the storm, predicted by barometers and their own despair, truly hit the Ajax. Waves as high as 4-story buildings slammed the hull, washing the deck with icy salt water. The ship groaned, its old frame creaking at the joints. This natural fury was their last ally. It made any inspection deadly dangerous, masked the sounds of destruction inside. 3 hours and 10 minutes later, the Coast Guard cutter, fighting the waves, closed to hailing distance. On the Ajax's deck, in the pouring rain, emerged Ignatiev and several sailors, including a disguised, slouching Alexei. His face was artfully dirtied, but his eyes, under streams of icy water, burned with a feverish glint. From the cutter, a megaphone blared in English. It was Eric Shaw's voice. "Captain of the Ajax, we have questions regarding your breakdown and irregularities in your ship's documents. We are sending an inspection team." "In this weather? You are insane!" Ignatiev roared back, playing fury and fear. "You will drown your own men. That is our risk. Prepare to receive." A small, frail boat, with 6 armed men led by Shaw, launched from the cutter. It was tossed on the waves like a splinter. Watching through binoculars, Ignatiev whispered to Alexei, "He's in an unnatural role for an intelligence officer. He must be a soldier now. That's our advantage. He will rush." Inside, in the sanctum sanctorum, Procedure Phoenix reached its climax. Victor personally placed the final charges at the base of the main processor unit. Nearby stood a canister of fuel, for the last resort, to create a fire from faulty wiring. Lydia, finished with the documents, approached him. "Everything that could be destroyed is destroyed, only the people remain." Victor looked at her. For the first time, something like tired humanity flickered in his gaze. "We do not destroy people, Lydia. We evacuate them, per Plan B, into life rafts, under cover of the storm, but not all at once. The innocent sailors go first." The boat with Shaw approached the hull. A ladder was lowered. The American Marines, soaked and angry, clambered onto the deck with difficulty. Shaw was last. His face was focused, his eyes scanning everything, the rust, the hatches, the faces of the crew. His gaze slid over Alexei, lingered for a second, but did not recognize. Saw only another frightened, frozen Russian sailor. "Captain, your documents," Shaw demanded, barely setting foot on deck. Ignatiev, muttering curses, handed him a folder. Shaw flipped through it quickly, but it was clear. He wasn't looking for discrepancies in the forms. He was looking for uncertainty, fear of the wrong kind. And at that moment, the unforeseen happened. From above, from the mast, came a soul-rending screech, then a deafening crack. Everyone looked up. The giant, multi-ton Corsian antenna, its weakened joints undermined by metal fatigue and violent pitching, gave way. It didn't just break, it tore off. For a few seconds, time slowed. They saw the massive steel structure, this masterpiece of engineering falling, spinning right toward the ship's center. Right onto the spot where, beneath the deck, lay the nearly destroyed but not yet empty main compartment. The impact was apocalyptic. The deck under their feet buckled like cardboard. The sound of the impact drowned out the roar of the storm. The ship shuddered through its entire being. Shaw and the Marines fell. Alexei gripped the railing, feeling the steel vibrate, transmitting the scream of its mortal wound. When the dust and spray cleared, the view was one of catastrophe. The antenna had pierced several decks, and in the gaping, smoking hole amidst twisted metal, something was visible. Not the crates of weapons. No, wreckage was visible, but not cargo. Specific ribbed panels, shreds of colored wires familiar to anyone who worked with radio electronics, and most importantly, part of a wall where, despite deformation, a fragment of a diagram could be seen. A diagram that had no place on an ordinary cargo ship. A diagram of a direction-finding antenna. The wind tore apart the smoke clouds. Eric Shaw got to his feet. He walked to the edge of the breach, looked down into this exposed, smoldering flesh of the real Ajax, then slowly raised his head. His gaze met Captain Ignatiev's. There was no triumph in Shaw's eyes. There was cold, absolute confirmation. He had been right. Then his eyes found Alexei, and this time they recognized. Not by features, by the eyes, by that very listening gaze Victor had tried so hard to hide. The gaze of a man who knows it's all over. Silence fell on the deck, broken only by the howling wind and the hiss of short circuits deep within the ship's wound. The legend was not just dead, it was torn to pieces and put on display. Shaw slowly pulled a portable radio from under his coat. "Base, this is Shaw. Code, True Ghost. I repeat, Code True Ghost. Confirm. Require immediate support. We have here. He paused, looking into the abyss. We have here an entire spy ship. There was no silence. It was devoured by sounds. The death groan of metal, the hiss of salt water flooding the breach, and the sharp, strained voice of Shaw on the radio, cutting through the storm's wail. The word spy hung in the air, turning the rain into needles, the wind into an accuser. Captain Ignatiev did not move. He stood gripping a handrail, his figure against the storm, the last bastion of a collapsed legend. His eyes met Shaw's. No plea, no threat, only acknowledgement. The war they had fought in the shadows had just burst into the light, and the rules had changed. The first to react was not Ignatiev, but Victor. He appeared on deck not from the ship's innards, but from the side, from the wheelhouse door. He was not in dirty overalls. He was in his dark, perfectly fitted jacket, and in his hand was not a pistol, but a hefty ship's log in a waterproof cover. "Officer," Victor's voice cut through the roar of the waves. He was calm, almost polite. "You are making a mistake. This vessel is in international waters. Your unlawful boarding under the pretext of document check is now an act of aggression. You see the consequences of the storm and structural deficiencies of our old ship. This wreckage is parts of a damaged cargo winch and navigation equipment. Your accusations are fantastic." This was not an attempt to persuade. It was a performance, a record for the protocol. Victor was creating an alternate reality, knowing Shaw would not believe it, but also knowing that diplomats and journalists would need a version. Any version. Shaw didn't answer. He gave an order to his soaked Marines. 2 remained on deck, rifles ready, but not raised, yet. The other 4, including Shaw himself, moved toward the gaping hole. They were going down, to see with their own eyes, to find irrefutable proof. At that moment, Ignatiev gave an